Tactical Breach Wizards might have one of my single favourite mechanics in any video game ever. Sure, while it might look like a fairly standard squad-based tactics game in the vein of XCOM or the conveniently named Into the Breach, Tactical Breach Wizards is centered around a particular strategy that is so satisfying that it puts all other games of its kind to shame. And that is the ability to blast any character in the game out of a window to defeat them instantly. A bunch of members of the Druid Mafia? Pop! Out the window. A highly trained private army of evil mages? Gone. Bye bye. A bastard traffic warlock boss who flings ghost cars at you? Yeah, turns out he's not so tough when he's flying out of a building at near lethal speeds. Tactical Breach Wizards' defenestration based magic is great, and I would expect nothing less from the people who made Heat Signature and Gunpoint, which are also largely about booting people through suspiciously thin panes of glass. But here's the thing, yes, while using a magic wand to propel an armor-clad battle wizard into lifelong medical debt is, of course, inherently awesome, what really impresses me about Tactical Breach Wizards is the way it keeps this single, fairly simplistic mechanic feeling just as satisfying to use in the final level as it was the very first time you punted a cop out of a building with a lightning bolt. There's some sort of weird bit of sorcery the game pulls, where very little actually changes from level to level, and yet this one basic strategy is able to be constantly refreshed and reimagined. And amazingly, Tactical Breach Wizards is able to sustain this surprising variety throughout its entire 15-ish hour runtime. Basically, what I really love about Tactical Breach Wizards is that it can boast a mastery of a particular facet of game design that few other titles can, and that is the art of novelty. See, I've been thinking recently that while games are great at providing us with a whole host of different kinds of enjoyment, from the fun of getting spooked, to the satisfaction of strategy, to the serene feeling of relaxation you get from playing a shooter, they're kind of inconsistent when it comes to keeping these feelings fresh. It's all well and good coming up with a cool idea that's fun to play around with, but if a game either isn't able to maintain that fun over long stretches of gameplay, leading to things getting samey, or squanders an idea too quickly, leaving us feeling unsatisfied, then all that effort is ultimately wasted, and we come to resent titles we would have otherwise enjoyed because our need for novelty wasn't being taken into account. On one hand, many different kinds of games vastly outstay their welcome, and seem to lose momentum as they go, allowing mechanics that used to be enjoyable to become stale and repetitive. Early on, many FPS games, like the mostly great Doom 2016, are full of new enemies to shoot and new guns to also shoot, but they seem to run out of ideas towards the ending, leaving you fighting just more of the same enemies and using the same tools, turning what should be an exciting climax into an unsatisfying slog. Equally, a lot of strategy games seem to be great at making their opening stages interesting, with a whole host of different factions to play as and strategies to pursue, but invariably all that variety ends up boiling down to one of a few standardized victory conditions, making the back half of a given game feel the same as basically all the others. And, on the other hand, just as many games seem to be unable to use their many ideas in a way that feels satisfying at all. Immersive sim-style games are well known for being full of incredibly sophisticated systemic mechanics that create loads of potential for interesting new solutions to problems or emergent strategies. And yet, this stuff never really gets used, because why create a Wallace and Gromit style contraption to kill a guy when you could just shoot him in the head instead? And along similar lines, loads of kitchen sinky a bit of everything games throw a seemingly endless barrage of new ideas for mechanics at you that never really end up going anywhere. Like how Dave the Diver is filled with an insane variety of minigames, but none of them, from restaurant management to the puzzles to Metal Gear Solid, actually get developed enough to be interesting. And so you're weirdly sort of trained to not get too excited about new mechanics because you know they're never going to be that fun. Basically, what I'm saying is that games and we as an audience have a bit of a problem when it comes to the subject of novelty. That little rush of excitement that we get when we see something new and surprising. And yes, I know what you're thinking, surely this problem of games not being able to maintain our interest has a more sophisticated cause than a lack of novelty, the jingly keys of game design. But I think it's exactly that preconception that has caused a lot of these design issues. Novelty might be a basic form of fun, but there's more to it than simply shoving an endless parade of new things in front of our faces at an ever-increasing speed, and it's by ignoring the nuances of novelty that we end up with games that seem to run out of steam too fast or can't make the most of the ideas that they have. Not to mention all the enjoyment that we as players miss out on because we don't seek out this kind of fun when it's right in front of us. By correctly exposing us to cool new ideas at the right time and giving us a chance to explore them at a satisfying level of depth, games can keep themselves feeling fresh and novel for much longer, and can turn routine gameplay loops into exciting chances for discovery and experimentation. Tactical Breach Wizards might be a fairly simplistic game when you get right down to it, but because it's so good at constantly refreshing itself and fully exploring each and every one of its ideas, it was able to keep me playing for tens of hours, when I got on board of games with much more quote-unquote content way quicker. But more on that later. So, what's the secret to using Novelty correctly? Well, I think the first and most fundamental lesson we need to keep in mind is that content and novelty are not the same thing, and in many cases, they are actively opposed. Novelty is, fundamentally, a neurochemical reward mechanism that encourages us to find new tools to solve problems with and new problems to solve. What it doesn't do is reward us for finding new things and new information in general. If novelty did work that way, we'd be endlessly fascinated by the infinite, ever-changing variety in grains of sand on the beach, and we'd have starved a long time ago. What this means in a game design context is that even though a deck of cards can be shuffled into so many configurations such that any one order of 52 cards is likely to be entirely unique throughout all of human history, any 2 games of solitaire are still going to feel more or less the same. Why? Because even though both sets are numerically distinct, we still think about them in the same fairly boring way. When you change the rules, however, the way we think about these cards, like in the excellent A Solitaire Mystery, where the creator of Baba Is You, which contains a bunch of different rule sets for the game, you need to relearn each one, and so those happy novelty chemical reward pathways can start firing all over again. TLDR, seeing something new isn't enough for it to feel novel. It instead needs to make us think in a new way. This is the key thing that I think both we and developers tend to forget. A game that leans on being novel will get boring very fast if it's not challenging your brain to think about things in new ways. This dynamic can be seen very clearly in games with procedural generation. The likes of Minecraft or No Man's Sky or Starfield have, on paper, literally trillions of different worlds you could be exploring, each one completely unique. Except, they don't really feel that way, do they? All too often, the algorithmic output of these games ends up falling within the conceptual boundary of stuff we've already experienced, and so they're unable to give us that great rush of novelty, because even though we haven't seen them before, it feels like we have. All 4 of these planets are totally unique. Anyone can see that, but the way we actually engage with them, namely running along featureless terrain looking for minerals, is basically the same, so their variety doesn't count for anything. Instead, games have a much greater effective variety, not by having an arbitrarily high number of permutations, but a much smaller number that all provide a meaningfully distinct experience. To compare survival games, Subnautica and Grounded, 2 survival titles with fixed, pre-designed worlds, actually created a much more long-lasting series of novel discoveries for me because their handcrafted nature allows for much more meaningfully distinct biomes and creatures. I'll never forget the first time I ventured into the dark, spooky blood kelp zone in Subnautica, or the first time I stumbled under the oak tree in Grounded and got spooked by a big scary wolf spider. But I'll be damned if I know what the terrain from my latest Minecraft playthrough looks like, even though I was literally the only person to ever see it. This same principle can be seen across the gaming spectrum. Raw content is not the same as meaningful variety and novelty. Loads of looty-shooty games love to throw mountains of gear at you, which technically each represent a unique series of strategic choices, but practically don't really change anything about the way you play at all. Ditto for stuff like Path of Exile's big fatty skill tree, or in fact any boring talent system that offers loads of incremental upgrades. These things are impressive, and getting to see them is certainly novel at first, but they offer no additional complexity over time, and only ever give you boring statistical upgrades that you can never really feel the difference of. Paradoxically, it's more novel to offer the player fewer choices that instead have a deeper effect on the way you play. You'll forget about plus 10 dexterity instantly, but an ability upgrade that fundamentally changes how it works, or an entirely new toolset, is much better for generating novelty because they change the way you think. Tactical Breach Wizards only offers its characters a handful of upgrades for exactly this reason. They might only come once every hour or so, but they are big. Stuff like Jen's grenades refreshing the move of anything they hit can enable some pretty silly shenanigans that totally change the way the game feels to play, as do the introduction of new characters, like Banks the Necromedic, who can make her own windows to knock people through, meaning you now have to think about the game in a totally different dimension. Literally. That said though, entirely new gameplay ideas aren't the only way to inject a feeling of novelty, and games that fail to realise this often fall flat on their faces. Look at the game Arranger, for example, a very fun indie puzzler about sliding yourself around on tile-based grids. It's very creative, and the game is filled with really fun implementations of this idea, like these fishing rods you need to reel in, these teleporting doors, and this cat with a bell you need to chase around. However, As fun as these ideas are, they never reappear at all, meaning that even mechanics as cool as this string you have to pull tight to play different notes never really get the chance to fulfill their potential, and the game instead becomes this frustrating series of introductions to cool mechanics that I wish had harder or more complex implementations that simply don't exist. In the pursuit of sheer variety, Arranger and games like it blow through their mechanical potential too fast and fail to capitalize on their potential for more than surface level novelty, leading to, weirdly, all these puzzle types feeling the same, because they all have the same short loop of discovery followed by disappointment. By instead reinterpreting and exploring existing concepts, we can get that same hit of novelty in a much more sustainable way that doesn't need constantly increasing mental and development overhead and can even build on itself over time. The exemplar of this technique is Mario, which maintains its iconic sense of childlike exuberance, not just by capitalizing on the fun of introducing new mechanics, but also the fun of expanding upon them, twisting them, and bringing them to a big dramatic finale. Look at this level in Mario Wonder, where the Rumba rule, which is all about these rolling boulder enemies. First they get introduced, then there's a little skill testing gauntlet where you need to dodge them and use them to your advantage, then there's a twist in the form of these cool half-pipes, before finally there's a fun finale where you get to become a Rumba yourself and annihilate a bunch of enemies. Each section of this level is a cool new way of looking at the central theme. So, in a way, you get 4 times as much novelty out of the same idea than if it had never been expanded upon. Beyond even that, mixing and matching existing concepts is another way that games can introduce new sources of novelty while not actually introducing any new elements. Look at, say, Portal. There are actually relatively few individual mechanics in both Portal games, but the way they get combined creates entirely new level concepts which makes each element feel fresh again. There's a level in Portal 2 that introduces turrets, then there's a level that introduces these glowy walls, put them together, and you get a level all about using glowy walls as an anti-turret shield, creating new gameplay out of materials the player was already familiar with. Multiplayer games owe their seemingly endless novelty to the same sort of dynamics. The constantly shifting landscape of a metagame pushes different sets of characters, cards, and cats together under different contexts, allowing games like, say, Dota and its insane number of heroes to create a totally different feeling experience just by shuffling the characters around, even though it's been the same game for coming up on 20 damn years. Of course, Tactical Breach Wizards does this too, constantly changing your relationship with each mechanic by introducing new ones. These snipers start off as high priority targets that massively restrict your movement, but later on, you actually want to keep them alive so that you can bounce even more dangerous foes into their line of fire to take them out, adding a bunch of new depth to combats where they feature. Games that lean heavily on synergistic mechanics are also a great way of creating this feeling, where new potential applications of individual elements get revealed in different contexts and combinations. In Balatro, for example, the same jokers can be put to use towards entirely different strategies, allowing a sort of emergent novelty to arise as you discover new applications for the same cards, rather than each one only being good for one job. The Midas Mask, for example, that turns all face cards into money-generating golden cards, is well suited as an early game economy pickup, but it can also be used as part of a money matters deck with Bull and Bootstraps, or it can be used to turn on Driver's License, which needs lots of enhanced cards, or to feed Vampire enhanced cards over and over again. Regardless of which one you pick, each implementation requires new knowledge and new thought processes in order to be effective, thereby generating novelty. In fact, the reason why roguelikes in particular are so compulsively playable often stems down to this exact reason. They're hotbeds for emergent novelty, with each combination of character, upgrades, and bosses creating a different enough experience to feel like it's brand new, even if it isn't, with each game pulling you towards these emergent novelties not out of chance, but because making synergies and understanding the game as a wider whole is strictly optimal, ensuring that the thing that keeps you winning is also the thing that keeps you playing. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case. As much as I've sung the praises of the human brain for being able to seek out new experiences in a variety of unexpected places, often without an incentive to find novelty, we simply don't even bother trying. I ran into this in a very big way with the new Elden Ring DLC, which, by the way, I won't spoil much of, don't worry. Getting to the DLC requires you to progress most of the way through the base game, so by the time I got there, I sort of already had my Unga Bunga Ultra Greatsword build figured out. What this meant was that all the cool new gear I found presented lots of potential novel new playstyles for me to have fun with, but also a time cost to learn how they worked, a big resource expenditure to upgrade them to parity with my existing gear, and possibly even spending a finite respec currency to make the whole new build work, that may very well be worse than what I was already using. The end result was that I beat the entire DLC, before any of the patches that made it easier, not that it matters, using the same gear that I went in with, and so I missed out on a bunch of cool things to do that I paid money to basically ignore? This happens over and over in games. It doesn't matter whether we avoid doing potentially fun side quests because they require too much grinding, dodge dealing with new strategies and characters because we can't be bothered to learn them, or even avoid entire ways of playing games because they're too much work. Like, yeah, sure, I could engage in the interesting mechanical nuance of stealthy, non-lethal play here, but that sounds like a lot of hard work, and his head's right there, and my gun's right here, so, no. Without a reason to seek out novelty, we will invariably retreat into comfortable routine, even if that means getting bored. And this is why games that want to capitalize on novelty need to at least provide a reason to do interesting new things, if not outright force us to. This is why a bunch of open-worldy games try their damnedest to interrupt you when you're just trying to do the main quest, because they know you'll have more fun if you sample some dumb side activities between the big important combat set pieces. In the open-worldy Zeldas, for example, Korok seeds and shrines are just valuable enough to be worth going out of your way to do, allowing you to have a bit of a break from monster slaying with some puzzles. And stuff like Cyberpunk and the new Spider-Mans outright bar your progress until you've goofed off for a bit and done some side content, ensuring you'll be able to fully appreciate the main quest when you get back to it. Even gameplay elements that would normally be seen as unduly restrictive can actually serve to enforce novelty by ensuring the players can't stick with a single dominant strategy. I mentioned Doom 2016 getting boring earlier, and that's due in large part to the fact that you can just blow through the entire game with one or two preferred weapons. In Doom Eternal, however, a game that for all its flaws kept my interest for much longer, enemies have much more specific weaknesses to particular weapons, like these guys whose shields can be shredded by the plasma rifle, cacodemons who love to munch grenades, and pinkies who need to be shotgunned in the butt. These specific weaknesses do limit flexibility of play, but they also force the player to constantly change their strategic posture in order to play well, rather than letting us brute force the entire game with a single strategy, thereby creating novelty that we wouldn't have ordinarily sought out. This is also why stuff like Persona and Pokemon's elemental weakness systems are so good at making each fight feel different, even when their battle systems are incredibly simplistic. You can't just default to a single high damage ability like in most turn-based RPGs, you need to solve the damage and efficiency puzzle every time, helping to keep things fresh over the incredibly long runtime these games typically have. Tactical Breach Wizards does a similar thing. Each new enemy type forces you to consider new strategies in order to not just win, but to take advantage of the inherent lethal efficiency of window-based violence. Armoured troops require extra pushing power courtesy of some of the later characters like Dahl the Riot Priest. Others move between actions, forcing you to plan trajectories in advance, and some even fire back if you hurt their friends, necessitating killing enemies in the right order. Your victory, as well as your satisfying instant kills, hinge on you getting creative, helping to keep you engaged with the mechanics and always seeing them in a novel new way. This encouraged novelty seeking can also play on our pride. Optional challenges or the promise of exclusive rewards if you jump through a few hoops first can spur us into experimenting with gameplay we'd normally completely ignore. Everything from Tactical Breach Wizards' confidence challenges to Celeste Strawberries get us to do new things, not because we thought of the idea ourselves, but because we can't bring ourselves to turn away from a challenge left uncompleted. But that's the thing, right? As much as a game might create new opportunities for novelty, make the most of the ones it has, and even encourage us to find novel ways to play, there's only ever going to be so many new experiences to go around. And while designers can pull all sorts of fun tricks out of the bag to stretch their game's potential as far as possible, ultimately, making smart use of it is kinda down to us. We need to see games less as a silo of content to be fully consumed, and more as a vehicle for unique experiences. It's the job of the game to direct us to all the most fun things to do, but only we can know when our time with the game is over, and which stuff we want to see more of. Whether we need to keep exploring for more fun things to do, or to call it quits and wrap things up satisfyingly, rather than eventually come to resent the game for our self-imposed boredom. When I played Yakuza 0, for example, I really wanted to see all the storylines, and so I stopped just before the very end of the main quest, and proceeded to grind out all the side content, up to and including the awful real estate minigame to see their storylines resolve, because I felt like I was missing out otherwise. The reality was that these minigames were fairly boring even before I started forcing myself to do them, and by the time I was done beating them, I just wanted the game to be over, and it almost spoiled a genuinely good ending because I made the mistake of confusing content and completion with novel experiences. So many people feel like they have to 100% complete games because otherwise they're not getting their money's worth or they're not seeing everything they're supposed to. But in this meticulous, joyless, content-brained approach, they end up sucking the fun out of activities they once found novel and exciting, and would remember much more fondly if they'd simply moved on once they started to get bored. And far from just ruining individual experiences, us valuing total playtime and amount of content over a game's meaningful variety and ability to sustain our interest leads to us seeking out the wrong kind of games in order to satiate a hunger that they will never be able to satisfy, and ends up encouraging bad design in the process. Games that offer huge worlds filled with limitless content content feel intuitively like they could fulfill our need for novelty forever, but the reality of actually playing them for a long time is always disappointing. And yet we fall for this trap every single time. Starfield promised us a whole galaxy, and yet it got boring midway through the tutorial. Every MMO promises us thousands of hours of adventuring, but by the time you've hit max level, you're already a seasoned grinder of the same content, and we're attracted to kitchen sink games with a bit of everything because we think they'll never get samey. But in reality, without a cohesive core, no amount of surface level variance will satisfy our more fundamental needs for long. Basically, in order to sustain itself, novelty needs depth. And it's in deeper, more focused experiences that true novelty lies. Because what we actually want out of this emotion isn't just things that are different, but things that are unique. And that is a key distinction a lot of players and games just don't think to make. Really, it's kind of a give and take. We need games to be flexible enough to allow a variety of different approaches and different appetites for novelty, but we also need to be honest enough with ourselves to engage with them in good faith. The mark of a game that handles novelty well lies in how thoroughly it explores its own potential, but also to what extent it allows the player to engage with that novelty on their own terms. The best open world and survival games are filled with unique, pre-planned things for players to go and see at their own pace and in whatever order they like, but never in such a way that we feel the need to do anything other than the main story to get a complete experience. Platformers and puzzle games can delight and surprise players much more effectively when they spend the time to showcase every facet of their cool ideas and what happens when they intersect, whilst also keeping a little something in reserve like optional difficulty thresholds or challenge levels to let players who still aren't satisfied access those last few strata of depth. And while sometimes games need to force players to step outside their mechanical comfort zone and see what it really has to offer, they also need to let us independently explore whatever strategies we find most interesting too. And, well, it's all of those things that make me love Tactical Breach Wizards and its defenestration based gameplay as much as I do. It's surprising and inventive all the way through, constantly opening up new ways to interpret its core toolkit, but when it's out of mechanical ideas, all the characters have had an arc and it's getting a little bit too easy, it draws things to an elegant close rather than stretch things out past the point of fun, content that it's shown me all the best bits, and that if I want, I'm still free to try out some of the optional dream levels, or even give the game a second playthrough with the developer commentary on. A very underrated way of showcasing the same game in an entirely new light through the eyes of the developer, adding a whole new layer of novelty to the entire game. Oh, and in case you were wondering, of course you can pick up the developer commentary tape and throw it at a guy to knock him through a window. I mean, obviously this game wasn't developed by amateurs, they know what they're doing. Hello, hello, hello. Wow, it has been a while, hasn't it? Well, as it turns out, a big project blowing up in your face and having to moderate one of the world's biggest game jams will not leave you with all that much energy for writing videos. Whoops. But we're back now, here in the After the Video segment. That little slice of the video where I tell you all about a cool thing you need to check out, as well as some other cool people who will remain an intriguing mystery. Ooh, what could they be? First up, I want to talk to you about a YouTuber called Any Austin, who, like me, is obsessed with pointless bullshit that no one should be paying attention to. Any Austin's deal is that he explores video game worlds and tries to understand or contextualize the nonsensical environments and population dynamics that make them up through the lens of reality. Whether it's Hyrule's rivers, Pokemon's employment statistics, or Skyrim's restaurants, Austin has an incredible way of making the most mundane details part of a really interesting showcase of just how much developers did, or didn't do, in service of realism, in a way that we don't ordinarily get to see. He's blown up recently, but I've been a fan of his for years, so I'm getting in now before he gets too big to recommend. Please do check Austin out. Of course, the other group of people you should be checking out, in a purely platonic and respectful way, you fucking pervs, are my patrons. The wonderful, generous, and just between you and me, a tiny bit better than everyone else people who support this channel and allow it to function. My patrons are the engine which keeps this YouTube channel running, and without them I'd have to choose between starving and putting mid-roll adverts where I talk about how I totally enjoy some grindy gacha game trash in the videos. And to be honest, it's not that hard of a choice, I'd rather go hungry. So, in exchange for keeping me in groceries, my patrons get some extra special rewards to show my thanks and to make their monetary contribution to my livelihood worth their while. For example, they get early access to videos, behind the scenes looks at what's going on with the channel, extra game design goodness containing all the cool ideas I couldn't stuff into this video, and even their name in the credits, with special mention going to my $10 a month patrons who get an extra special voice shout out like these awesome people, who are Abum Willard, Arbiter of Shames, we're off to a great start there, Ali Wright, Andrew Labrano, Asaran, Auna94, Bobby, Brennan Spalding, Brian Notariani, Konstantin Amend, Cosmix360, Daniel Medjes, Dirk Jan Karambeld, Digletier, Dis Ellie, Ekton, Edward Franklin Woods, Edwina the Space Bun, Eric Walston, Eugene Bulkin, Gazcol, Jacob Dylan Riddle, Jinkaloid, Kevin Help Us, Conlove, Kangi, Luke Kokoran, Mace254, Marika Vladilena Altair, Mark Vallant, May Contain Fox-Like Substance, Mika Oi, Nate Graff, Oliver Marhofer, Patrick Romberg, Peter Tomasic, Reddinex, Regal Regex, Ray's Dad, Silver Folfi, Steve Rollerman, Steve Riley, Ty Guren, Tyler Duncan, Uprising, Von Boomslang, Whimsical Wisp, Zach Brandmeier, and ciao. Okay, that's it, that's all. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around. Bye!